I think that all religions are wrong in the same way, in that they privilege faith over reason, but they're not all equally bad in the same way all the time. I mean, if I'd been writing in the 1930s, I would certainly have said that the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world because of its open alliance with fascism and anti-Semitism, which the damage from that our culture has never recovered from and never will. But at the moment, it's very clear to me that the most toxic form that religion takes is the Islamic form. The horrible idea of wanting to end up with Sharia, with a religion-governed state, a state of religious law, and that the best means of getting there is jihad, holy war, and that Muslims have a special right to feel aggrieved enough to demand this, I think is absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And in its entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
But you're saying the same also about
it. Also that God speaks. The Archangel Gabriel speaks only Arabic, it seems.
I just want to say, in retrospect, you were very civil, actually. I don't know what I was thinking.
This is
the same characterization of all religions?
Well, actually, no, because remember, Islam makes one special claim for itself. All religions claim to be revealed truth. They all are founded by divine revelation. But Islam rather dangerously says, ours is the last and final one. There can't be any more after this. This is God's last word. Now, that's straight away a temptation to violence and intolerance, and if you note, it's a temptation they seem quite willing to fall for.
Rabbi,
second, I had another motive, which is this. If you remember Dick Gregory, the older comrades here will, great black comedian and civil rights activist, when he came to write his memoir, he called it nigger.
Right.
It upset a lot of people, including his old mum, who called him and said, why are you doing this? And he says, Mama, every time you hear that word again, they're selling my book. So every Allahu Akbar reminds people that we're in a very serious struggle with a very depraved religion. And that help is available.
Friend, you give no quarter?
Look, he believes in the prophecy of Muhammad. I'm sorry to say, I think he's been, at best, conned. Yeah.
Our time is ticking down.
When there's a confrontation between everything I love, scientific inquiry, reason, cosmopolitanism, secularism, emancipation of women, so on. And those are the things I love, by the way, and everything I hate, Stone Age fascism, religious bullshit, and so on. I find it's a no-brainer. I know exactly which side I'm on. I knew right away. I felt exhilarated on the 11th of September. I feel slightly ashamed to say that, in view of the fact that so many people lost their lives that day. But when the day was over and I'd been through the gamut of rage and disgust and nausea and so on, not fear, I will claim for myself. I'm not afraid of people like that. I'm very angered by them. But there was something I hadn't analyzed. When I went into it in myself, I was pleased to find it was exuberant. I thought, okay, right. I'll never get bored with fighting against these people. And their defeat will be absolute. It will be complete.
And it is because that event dispelled the illusions about what the adversary was up to? Yeah.
Yes. In part, and because it made people value, or had the potential for making people value things like science, reason, secularism. I would prefer to say myself atheism, but no, let's say secularism. The Enlightenment, things that people take for granted. Rather as when my friend Salman Rushdie was threatened with murder for money, for bounty, by a theocratic leader on the 14th of February 1989, I thought, well, okay, this is easy to decide. But a lot of people then were saying, but what about Muslim sensitivities? I mean, may he not have offended some people? And I said, just listen to what you say. Just can you have any idea what you sound like when you say that? We had to put up with a fair bit of this time too. And then I've also felt that we owed the people of Afghanistan a debt. I mean, we had let these Taliban characters take over their lives in their country because they were the clients of our filthy Pakistani military clients. I thought, well, here at last one can point out to people we have to cancel this appalling debt. and remove this foul regime. And I'm only sorry it didn't lead to the collapse of the Pakistani.
On the clock.
I think a way I might do it actually is by commenting on what Tony just said, because he succeeded in doing what I had hoped I might get him to do earlier, which is to allow me to drive him back onto the territory of metaphysics with which I began, because we did need to transcend that and thus to get beyond questions like, well, are religious people good, are they bad, and other things that are very important. Does religion make them behave better or worse, and so forth. I'll give you, and I'll challenge Tony on an example. I mentioned earlier our attachment to the labor and socialist movement in our lifetimes. For a very long time, we had in that movement a challenger, apparently from the left, the communist movement, which has only been dead a very short time now. It actually hasn't died everywhere yet, and which said it had a much more comprehensive and courageous and thoroughgoing answer than we did to the problems created by capitalism and imperialism and other things, and really proposed a fighting solution. And if I was to point to you the number of heroic people who believed in that, and the number of wonderful works especially of fiction, novels and essays written by people who believed in it, you could probably all of you mention one of your own. If you were a Canadian, I hope they still teach about him in school, the great example of Norman Bethune, heroic doctor who went to volunteer in China during the Civil War on the communist side, did amazing work, invented a form of battlefield blood transfusion. Just one among many examples. It was the communists in many parts of Europe who barred the road to fascism in Spain, and kept Madrid for many years from falling to Franco and Hitler and Mussolini. Gandhi may take credit for the Indian independence movement, too much in my view, but no one would deny the tremendous role played by the Indian communists in doing this, in helping to break the challenge, break the hold of Great Britain on their country. As a matter of fact, some people find it embarrassing to concede this, but I don't, as a supporter of it myself. The African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, at least half of its members of the Central Committee and the Executive were members of the Communist Party until quite recently, very probably including Mandela himself. There's no doubt about it. There was real heroism and dignity and humanism to those people, but we opposed it. We said, no, it won't work. Why won't it work? It's not worth the sacrifice of freedom that it implies. It implies that all these great things can only be done if you'll place yourself under an infallible leadership. One that, once it's made a decision, has made that decision and you are bound by it. You might conceivably notice where I'm going here. It's why many of the people, the brilliant intellectuals who did leave it, left it very often for as high reasons of principle as they joined it in the first place. And the names of their books are legion and legendary. The best known is called The God That Failed, precisely because it was an attempt at a bogus form, a surrogate of religion. But let no one say, and when the history comes to be written, no one will be able to say that it didn't represent some high points in human history. But I repeat, it wasn't worth it at the sacrifice of mental and intellectual and moral freedom. And that was the purpose of my original set of questions on the metaphysical side. Are you, consider yourselves, and consider this carefully, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, comrades, friends, are you yourselves willing, for the sake of certain elements of the numinous, perhaps for a great record of good works, as it's proposed by Tony, are you willing to say that you give your allegiance to an ultimate Redeemer? Because you're not really religious if you don't believe that there is a divine supervision involved. You don't have to believe it intervenes all the time. If you don't believe that, you're already halfway out the door. You don't need me. But are you willing to pay the price of a permanent supervisor? Are you willing to pay the price of believing in things that are supernatural? Miracles, afterlives, angels. Are you willing to admit, perhaps this most of all, are you willing to admit that human beings can be the interpreter of this divine figure? Because a religion means that you will have to follow someone who is your religious leader. You can't, try as you may, follow Jesus of Nazareth. It can't be done. You can try and do it, it can't be done. You'll have to follow his vicar on earth, Pope Benedict the 26th, as presently, his own claim, not mine. the apostolic succession, the vicar of Christ on earth. You have to say, this person has divine authority. I maintain that that and what goes with it is too much of a sacrifice of the mental and intellectual freedom that is essential to us to be tolerated. And you gain everything by repudiating that and standing up to your own full height. And you gain much more than you will by pretending that you're a member of a flock or in any other way, any kind of sheep. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not just in disagreement when someone like Tariq Ramadan, accepted now at the high tables of Oxford University as a spokesman, says the most he'll demand when it comes to the stoning of women is a moratorium on it. I find that profoundly much more than annoying.
Right, yeah.
Insulting, not only insulting, but actually threatening.
But you're not offended. This is, you don't take any, I don't see you taking things personally. You're alarmed by the liabilities of certain ways of thinking, as in Ramadan's case.
But he would say, or people like him would say, that if I doubt the historicity of the Prophet Muhammad, I've injured them in their deepest feelings.
Right.
Well, I am, in fact, I think all people ought to be offended, at least in their deepest integrity, by, say, the religious proposition that without a supernatural celestial dictatorship, we wouldn't know right from wrong.
The great physicist Steven Weinberger has very aptly put it, in the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can, but if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion. Now, I've got now 1 minute and 57 seconds to say why I think this is very self-evident in our material world. Let me ask Tony again, because he's here, and because the place where he is seeking peace is the birthplace of monotheism. So you might think it was unusually filled with refulgence and love and peace. Everyone in the civilized world has roughly agreed, including the majority of Arabs and Jews and the international community, that there should be enough room for 2 states for 2 peoples in the same land. I think we have a rough agreement on that. Why can't we get it? The UN can't get it, the US can't get it, the Quartet can't get it, the PLO can't get it, the Israeli parliament can't get it. Why can't they get it? Because the parties of God have a veto on it, and everybody knows that this is true. Because of the divine promises made about this territory, there will never be peace, there will never be compromise. There will instead be misery, shame, and tyranny, and people will kill each other's children for ancient books and caves and relics. And who is going to say that this is good for the world? And that's just the example nearest to hand. Have you looked lately at the possibility that we used to discuss as children in fear? What will happen when messianic fanatics get hold of an apocalyptic weapon? Well, we're about to find that out as we watch the Islamic Republic of Iran and its party of God allies make a dress rehearsal for precisely this. Have you looked lately at the revival of Tsarism in Putin's Russia, where the black-cowled, black-coated leadership of Russian Orthodoxy is draped over an increasingly xenophobic, tyrannical, expansionist and aggressive regime? Have you looked lately at the teaching in Africa and the consequences of it, of a church that says AIDS may be wicked, but not as wicked as condoms? That's exactly no seconds left, ladies and gentlemen. I've done my best. Believe me, I have more.
There was going to have to be some kind of a pushback against what we could see coming. It was going to be a volunteer effort. It was going to communicate itself that way. How else were we going to reply to the increasing menace, rising menace of Islamic Jihad? How are we going to, for example, deal with the emergence of probably the most reactionary papacy since the mid-19th century? How are we going, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I have to cough for a little bit. I was afraid this would happen. I do terribly apologize. A very reactionary Eastern Orthodox church, if it comes to that, as well, the Eastern Catholic forces. Thank you. Now arranged, many of them, behind the dark and sinister figure of Vladimir Putin. Then one mustn't exempt, of course, the millennial settlers in Palestine who believe that by bringing in as many fanatics of Jewish origin as they can and forcing out as many Palestinian Arabs as they can, they may bring on the Messiah. and indeed the apocalypse.